Hello and welcome to the channel. I'm here with Joran.
Hello. This video will be about testing the tensile strength of PLA Plus and what happens when it's shot with a BB gun.
Disclaimer, don't try this at home without a proper knowledge and safety precautions. Seriously, don't do it. So before we get started, let's discuss what we think is going to happen to all the tests we're going to put the plastic to.
Starting with gyroid, what I expect for the pulling test is that gyroid is going to be fairly strong because the plastic is fairly linear to the force that's being applied to. And for shooting, it's going to be actually probably the best because it's basically a weave pattern. And if you look at stuff like bulletproof vests in general, they have a very much like a weave pattern in them to catch the bullet, so I expect this one to do the best.
Well, I think Jared will be a decent choice with the shooting and pulling it as well. Just with the, as already been said, the way it weaves not necessarily through itself, but on top of itself, does make it decently strong. That leads us on to cubic.
Yeah, for cubic. This is probably going to be the strongest one for the pulling test. I know this is one of the most used infill patterns in 3D printing, as far as I know anyway. So I expect this to be good just based off that alone. If you look at the actual pattern, there's a lot of like little triangles in it, and as we know, triangles are very good for distributing force evenly, so I expect this to do very well. For shooting, I'm not quite so sure because it's not, well, it's basically not a weave pattern like gyroid is, and I don't expect it to do as well because of the different air pockets and stuff that's in it.
Yeah, that can be true. I mean, I think gyroid, I have a little bit of experience with 3D printing myself, and I basically use cubic only. I am curious what the different infill patterns are going to do with cubic, because it can get quite strong.
You
even
mean
with
infill densities?
Yeah, the infill percentages and all that stuff. It might stop more bullets in the sense of it hitting one of the triangular sides, meaning it's sloped, because it's basically just 3D triangles, which means it might bounce into itself, where it breaks through the first layers and then it hits an angled wall and bounces away from it, not penetrating but still breaking it. If we pull with pulling, will be decent.
Internal deflection is what you're getting at. I think.
Yes.
Yeah, that could be interesting. For the Cross 3D, this is going to be the worst, I think. If we look at the structure, there is no structural benefits to it in the sense like distributing force well, or it's or a bunch of plastic in the same direction as the force, like with the gyroid. So I think this one's going to be the worst in both the pulling and the shooting test, because there's also just a bunch of air pockets again, even worse than the cubic.
Cross 3D will probably be the worst. Yeah, it is. The only upside I can see with Cross 3D is it looks cool. With
well, that doesn't help us now, does it?
But yeah, it doesn't help with shooting and pulling it. Like, oh wow, it looked cool. Yeah, but it didn't perform better. Yes, Cross 3D will probably, as you said, will be the weakest out of all of them.
This is not architecture, Jules. Come on.
Yes, it doesn't have to look good, it has to function properly. And it's on the inside, so you don't see it anyway. That leaves us with the last remaining bit, which is
the solid one.
It's solid.
Yes, basically it's solid. It will probably do the best in terms of overall force and overall stopping ability because there's just the most amount of material. What I am curious about its efficiency. So how much force per weight will it actually have in comparison to the other ones?
And solid will have the longest sprint time because it uses the most material, because, well, it's solid, it just keeps going. But I feel like it will be the strongest and most resistant to the BBs that are going to be shot at it. And it may have, depending on how strong it actually is, it may actually be useful for some stuff, instead of just, printing for fun and light structures, but actually being able to make structures that you can stand on.
So this was the first test. This is the only one we're going to show in its entirety, just to give an idea of what a tensile test looks like. The other ones we will edit down to the moment they start breaking, because otherwise this video would be way too long. So enjoy. The printer used for this is a Creality Ender 3 Pro, and it used PLA Plus ordered print. The settings for the prints used a wall line count of 2,
and the top and bottom line count of 3, making the only difference between the prints the infill pattern and percentage. Quick thing, if you order your PLA here, you do have to unwind the spool a bit, otherwise it will start catching on itself and ruin all your hopes and dreams with 3D printing. With the tests done, we can look at the results, and Jordan has made a lovely Excel sheet with all the data necessary to show you what has happened.
So in the top 3 rows, we have 2 different kinds of steels and aluminium. This is for, well, just reference to the PLA tests. And then we have, of course, all the PLAs in the left with different infill percentages, resulting in different data, of course. Yeah. So for gyroid, let's start with gyroid. Gyroid was kind of bang in the middle in terms of weight and fairly strong. We can see it's slightly weaker than cubic, but not by much. Something interesting to note about gyroid was that it was a very brittle reaction. Once it came to its peak load, it just kind of snapped. I suspect this is because the plastic strands don't have a lot of space to move and get into tension very quickly, so therefore they'll snap very quickly.
I mean, yeah, that is mainly what happens. Also with plastic, it does have a lot more stretch in it than the metal, so it just stretches a bit more. And if you put it in a graph, you get a longer graph, as you could kind of see in the video. Yeah, it is indeed in the middle of all of them. I mean, if you compare it to the worst ones, like Cross 3D, which was arguably the worst one, because as with hypotheses, we did say that it had no structure in it, unlike gyroid and cubic, and it was,
which was proven right here.
And just the weight is less. It is the lightest of all of them, but that also shows in the strength because it failed quickest. What we do see is the higher infill percentage that we've got, the more it snapped instead of gently pulled apart, which was interesting to see.
Yeah, but then again, that's probably because the plastic has less space to just move out of the pattern it's printed into. So with cubic, the triangles go and deform before the actual plastic will start to snap. Cubic was also very tough in that sense, because if we look at the graphs, once it gets to peak load, it's very remains at that force for quite some time, only decreasing slightly, and it does so for quite a long time before it actually starts, well, actually tearing. It didn't really break, it started tearing.
Although the higher infill percentages did kind of actually snap. Usually the lower ones, like 20, 40,
Yeah,
and 60, generally just
started
torn themselves
tearing, yeah.
apart and just broke. But we did have one test where it broke, but it kept on pulling because it was just gently holding on to itself.
Yeah,
And
there
not
was like one very little strand still there that just kept
Yeah.
going, basically.
I
So
mean,
we had to manually stop that one.
the strongest one by quite a margin, actually, is solid. That was to be expected. It is a solid option. It is the heavy
Yes,
side of
it
all
is.
of them, not by a lot though, considering the
What
cubic.
what was very surprising is its efficiency, actually. I didn't expect the solid one to be the most efficient in terms of weight per force.
It is. I mean, if you look at the amount of force it can handle, the maximum. Of course, it might be stretching at that point already. So if you're going to build something with this and take these results, which might not be accurate because we only tested one stick of each. We could have done more, but we didn't have time for that.
Yeah,
You can almost put like
for the
200
actual
kilos on there.
for the actual infills, cubic 40% turned out to be the most efficient in terms of the force it can handle per the weight it has.
Jarwood 40% is the least efficient out of all of them, which means that it's the least amount of force per gram of weight, so it's the least bang for your buck. With, as I said, solid, you can put almost 200 kilograms on that. Of course,
Actually,
it would probably start stretching out and breaking. So you would, if you're going to build these results, put a safety factor in.
if we look at the solid one, 1970 newtons divided by 9.81 is actually just straight up 200 kilograms.
That is pretty much 200 kilograms. Is a lot of weight. We did not expect that from this.
But it would be overall weaker. I expected this one to be the strongest, but I did not expect it to be as strong as it was.
And those are basically the results of our tests. We also tested a PLA Plus by shooting at it with a BB gun. Test which info patterns would stop the BBs and which one would pass right through. To do this, we got a test setup from wood and polycarbonate, where we also had to put the cameras in so we can get the beautiful footage that you will see.
The gun that was used has a muzzle velocity of 245 meters a second with 7.5 joules of energy. We shot from a distance of 5.9 meters. The BBs that were used are 4.5 millimeters, 177 calibers, steel BBs weighing in at 0.36 grams.
Now that the shooting is done, we can take a look at the results and discuss a bit what happened.
Yeah, well, so as expected, the Jarwood did the overall best. It performed the best. The BBs even stopped at 40% infill, which the other ones did not achieve, except for the cubic, but we'll get back to that. The 60% gyroid actually performed very similar to the 80% infills of the other patterns. which is quite a significant difference. So the cubic at 40% did very well. It stopped the bullets, but at 60%, it completely failed. Why this happened, we're not quite sure. We don't really know what happened. When the BBs went in, they just kind of pressed the cube out of it somehow. And if you look at the exits of that plate, there are actually just cubes flown out, which was very weird. The solid one is, of course, the most solid. This was not unexpected, but only having a minimal difference with the 80% infill percentages. If you look at the plates, all of them have a dent. The dent is the smallest on the solid one, but the difference is not significant. That might change though if you have a thinner plate. This was 8 millimeters thick. If it were to be thinner, it might have a more significant difference there. And the cross 3D was, well, the worst. This was expected, and it's worse all across the board. All the infill percentages with cross 3D was just the worst of all of them. So in the end, the question is, what infill should you use? And the answer, as always, is it depends. It depends on the use case. Overall, if you go for strength, solid is the best option. It is just the strongest in every regard, but it weighs the most and is the most expensive.
You also have to take print time into account. If you want to print it as fast as possible, let's say you have a school project that needs to be printed in a short time, use less infill, less wall lines, counts, and all that stuff, but it will make the material weak. If you want the strongest, you go for solid. You need strength. But it's also the most expensive. You use the most plastic, and it will take forever to print.
So often an in-between option is a good, like, kind of in-between. So you don't go for the least amount or the most strongest one, but you go somewhere in between, like a, I don't know, 60% gyroed or an 80% cubic, something like that. And if we look at the results, these are the most, well, still strong options without being the most expensive one. So use cubic or gyroed.
Whatever you do, don't use cross 3D. It might look cool, but it will break apart.
Another interesting question we got from these tests is what would happen if we have 100% infill with different patterns. This is something we thought of later that we didn't think of when starting these tests. So that might be something that will be interesting.
It also might be an option for another time. Maybe not. We'll see.